to give us some context today, do you ever remember the old days? Maybe not as quite as old as I did. I used to program in C++, and the idea of libraries was you get some source code from somewhere, who knows where, you just picked it up. And then you'd fiddle with it for about 2 weeks, trying to get it to work, get the threading model right, getting the code right, trying to figure out what in heck it did from the source code. And when you're all done, you normally said, it's not worth the effort. Things have changed a lot since then. And today we have somebody illustrious, which I think all of you know, who's going to talk about a better way of doing things, which is NuGet. And it can be used in a lot of different functions, one of which is to help us manage our source code and those libraries and things quickly, but it can do a lot more. So talking today is going to be Alan, and he went to school at Knox College. I can even remember this stuff, so he didn't have to remind me. Went to Knox College and has worked at a number of places. He started at MSF&W. He worked at LRS for a number of years, and now works for Cap Strategies. And he's now working at Department of Transportation as a contractor. And in the near future, he's going to get married very soon now. By the way, congratulate him. You can laugh. Thank you. Alan Scharfenberg today is going to talk about NuGet. So, go ahead, Al. I messed up. I was
Thank you, Mark, for that wonderful introduction. And I can't believe you remembered all that. You have a better memory than me. But as Mark said, I'm Alan Scharfenberg. I'm a software development consultant with Capital Strategies here in town. And tonight, I'd like to present to you Enterprise Library Management with NuGet. I always like to start my talks with a little bit of background. I think it's important to know a little bit about your speaker because all of our experiences in our careers and the things that we're interested in, I think, play a big role in how we approach a topic. And so I think it's important to set a little context at the beginning of a talk in order to give the audience that context. So obviously, I have a developer background. I've been a software developer for 9 years, and I started in the Java 1.3, 1.4 days. Not too long afterwards, I switched to .NET. I've been a .NET developer for 7 years. I started in the Visual Studio 2005 and .NET 2.0 beta days. In the last 5 years, though, I've been very interested in application lifecycle management. So the processes that we use to build our code and manage, how we build our software. And that's something I've been very interested in. I actually started in that with release management on a framework project that I worked on for LRS. And a little begrudgingly, I accepted that role. And it ended up being one of the things that I've enjoyed most in my career. I've also spent quite a bit of time in Team Foundation Server 2008. I've done some 2005 and some 2010, but mostly TFS 2008. And I really think it's a wonderful tool to help with application lifecycle management. And I think that does, that particular interest of mine, I think, plays into the talk tonight. We're talking about managing our enterprise libraries with NuGet, which is a very application lifecycle management related topic. Manage your libraries and working them in with your builds and those sorts of things. I also included on here a link to my website and my Twitter handle. I'll be posting these slides on the user group site and my own blog for reference after the talk. But in case there's a question that you didn't come up with tonight, that way you can get a hold of me. So I have that information up there. I also like to start all my talks with a roadmap. I think it's important to communicate what I am going to talk about and obviously from what's not on the slide, what I'm not going to talk about. I'm going to talk just a little bit about what is NuGet and why you should use it. I think this is, well, I know this is a very developer-centric audience, so I imagine most of us have used NuGet before for managing some libraries or for getting some libraries for our solutions. So I'm not really going to spend a large portion of the talk talking about, actually the NuGet client side. But in case anybody in the audience is not familiar with it, I did want to set that context. And of course, this wouldn't be a very good talk about managing your libraries using NuGet if I didn't show you how to create your own NuGet packages. I'll talk a little bit about versioning in NuGet. It's actually a very important subject, and it's important to know the best practices for versioning your packages in NuGet. I also talk about setting up your own NuGet feed, kind of corollary with creating your own packages. It wouldn't be very useful if I showed you how to create packages that nobody could get to. So it's important to know how to create your own NuGet feed so that other developers, either on your team or in the corporation or other enterprise environment in which you work, can get to your libraries. And then I'm going to talk, recap at the end with a short talk on just NuGet in the enterprise in general. So what is NuGet? NuGet is a Visual Studio extension, and it's compatible with Visual Studio 2010 and 2012. And so that means that you can download it from the Visual Studio gallery. If you're not familiar with installing Visual Studio extensions, that's something that you can ask me about after the talk. And it's built to manage your external libraries in your Visual Studio solution. So it's really not meant to manage the guts of your solutions. It's built to manage those libraries that are outside of your solution, like versions of Vanity Framework or other libraries that you would want to use that aren't a part of your solution. It's an open source project backed by the Outer Curve Foundation, and it's released under the Apache 2 license. It's also heavily Microsoft. The majority of the development team are either current or former Microsoft employees. So it's a very Microsoft-centric, Microsoft-focused open source project, which I think gives it a big advantage for managing libraries for our Visual Studio solutions, and that it works fairly seamlessly with Visual Studio. It has a very Visual Studio and .NET development focus. So I think in this case, it being a heavily Microsoft open source project, I think is a very good thing. It's currently under active development. NuGet 2.0 was released on June 19th. And in my experience, they seem to release a new version every month or so. So I mean, they're actually on a fairly rapid release cycle. So there's always new features coming down the pipe. And I included a link to the NuGet main page, nuget.org, for further reference. Now, why NuGet? I mean, it obviously manages your libraries for you, but I mean, there's a lot of ways you can manage your libraries, right? You could have a compiled assemblies folder that you copy all your binaries that you use into. I mean, there's a lot of different other strategies for managing your libraries. So why use NuGet to do it? Well, the wonderful thing about NuGet is that it automates several annoying library installation steps. Locating, which is probably the least annoying of the steps, going out and finding the library you're interested in, or maybe if you don't know it by name, you're looking for a WPF control library or something, to be able to actually find a library that you want to use in your solution. Downloading the library, verifying that the package that you downloaded was complete, and that the checksum matches and all that. Copying the files into your solution, so the binaries and tools and content that are part of the library, copying those into your solution for you. Updating your project references, and I think this is probably one of the biggest advantages of using NuGet. If you download a library using NuGet and install it, and you pick which projects in your solution you want it to be installed to, it handles adding all the project references for you. Which that saves a ton of time, especially if you have a solution with 10 projects. Download a library with 4 files in it. That does save you some time, especially if you have to do it on like 40 different solutions. Another very powerful and a little more advanced feature is you can actually, as part of your NuGet package install, apply config changes. So for your web or app config file, certain libraries require certain configuration values set, like the Entity Framework 431, for example, wants to know what database you want to point to, those sorts of things. NuGet package is going to go ahead and apply those changes, and it's really a great way to both make it easy for developers to realize what config that they either need to or can play with, or also be able to expose certain properties that can be adjusted later. NuGet also handles updates for you. In the user interface in Visual Studio, there's a tab that you can click on for NuGet and actually see the updates that are available for your libraries. And that's actually saves a ton of time. Instead of having to go out and browse blogs and check all these things to see if there's an update, you can just open your solution, open the little NuGet UI, and say, hey, are there any updates? I mean, that's very handy. And NuGet will also handle dependencies for you. managing your libraries manually, I mean, suppose you have a library A that depends on library B, and maybe B depends on C. I mean, who knows? That's not really your concern. You want to use library A. NuGet, and the way you can set up packages, it's easy to mark and say, inside that package A, to mark and say, hey, package B is required. You have to have package B to be able to use, package A, and whatever package B uses. So when you actually add library A to your project, NuGet's smart enough to crawl that dependency graph and download the whole bundle. That saves a ton of time trying to debug and figure out, well, it's not working. It's saying this one assembly is missing. I can't figure it out. That's very, very useful. So I did want to demo real quick installing a NuGet package. So I'm going to pop over to my Visual Studio right here. I have my little app.demo project, and it's the greatest application ever written. It's a nice blank white window, but that's kind of besides the point for the talk. You have an app, and there's a library that you want to add to it. Let's pretend like we've done some prototyping with our client. They like the UI that we've laid out, and now they want to see some sample data in it. And we want to be able to get to that data. So we want to be able to add a reference to the latest Entity Framework to our project, instead of having to go out and find the zip file and pull the binaries out and copy it into a compiled assemblies folder or whatever you did before NuGet. It's just as easy as right-clicking on your solution and clicking Manage NuGet Packages for Solution. Now, just a note, I have NuGet 2.0 installed in this solution. And again, if you're not sure how to install Visual Studio extensions, just please see me after the talk, and I can demonstrate that. But you'll notice that Entity Framework is the top library that's available. By default, the main NuGet feed, which is shown here, the NuGet official package source, shows you the packages by most downloaded first, which is convenient for us because that's the package we want to download. So we say, well, okay, we want to install the Entity Framework package, and it allows you, when you go to install a package at the solution level, you can pick which projects you want it installed to. If you had a project with multiple, or if you had a solution with multiple projects, you may not want it installed in all of them. Supposing you had a data layer, you could say, well, no, please just install this in the data layer for me. But we have a simple solution with just one project, so we'll go ahead and just let it install on everything. Another thing to note is you have the ability, when you create a NuGet package, to specify a license that has to be accepted in order to install the package. And that's very useful in the open source realm if you want to make sure that your as-is without warranty is accepted. So I'll just say I accept the license. I don't care what your license is. So we'll go ahead and, well, that was really fast. And it's just that fast to install a NuGet package in your solution, depending on your network speed. But as you'll notice, it created a, if you go into the references here, you'll notice that it added a reference to Entity Framework for us. It also added this app.config file, which if we had an app.config file already, it would have only modified it, but because we didn't have one before, it went ahead and created one for us with a different Entity Framework configuration in it. It also created this packages.config file, which is kind of, it's just a reference within each individual project within your solution saying what packages are installed. And actually, I'm running in disconnected mode with TFS right now, but as you'll notice out here, if I'll get it to expand, oop, that's the wrong one. In my source folder for my app.demo, I have my app demo solution, and actually if I was connected to SQL Server at the moment, or sorry, TFS at the moment, it would handle that. It would handle that for me. Sorry, just a little connection issue. One thing I wanted to mention, and unfortunately I wasn't able to demonstrate it right here, is one thing that's wonderful about NuGet is it'll actually handle integrating with TFS for you. So when you actually pull down the package and install it, one thing that's wonderful is that it'll actually make all the appropriate checkouts in TFS, adds of files, adds of the packages to the packages folder, which is actually at this level right here. Yeah, you can see it. It's just not in TFS because I'm running in disconnected mode. But it'll actually, under our source folder, which is at the same level as our solution, it creates a packages folder and then stores all of our packages in there. with this repositories config file, which is really a pointer table. The repositories config just points to all the package configs, so it has a central place to find them all. But one thing that's really wonderful about NuGet is it handles all that for you, the integration with TFS. And I think, from what Colin told me, some of the older versions didn't do that quite as well. But in my experience, the newer versions of NuGet do handle integrating with TFS for you. So that makes for a very seamless and easy to use solution. So really, the benefits of NuGet, as I've kind of talked about, no fuss, no muss. It's easy. You know, you decide, hey, I'm working on this solution. I need this library, or this friend of mine told me about this library that does this magical thing, and I can go out, I can download it, I can go find the package, I can download it, install it in just a matter of seconds. I don't have to go out in blogs and what's the latest stable version and go out to Codeplex or whatever and try to find, you know, the library that I need and pull the zip file down and do all that garbage. It handles all that for you. And kind of a corollary to that, it saves time. You know, our example here was just one library, but imagine you had a solution that required 5 libraries or 10 libraries or you know, ridiculously 25 libraries, you know, and trying to do that all by hand compared to letting NuGet do it for you. It's really a very powerful tool. It also works very well with automated builds. As I pointed out in the demo a minute ago, the packages folder is at the same level as the solution. So that actually works for those. I don't know if many people here have done a lot of build work, but from a build perspective, it makes it very easy. All your code and your projects and your solutions, and then all the external dependencies that you reference are all together. And it makes it very easy to create automated builds, to do continuous integration, you know, nightly drops, you know, final like RTM deployment builds. If you do that sort of thing, it makes that very easy. And as we discussed before, NuGet also handles updates for you and handles dependencies, which are also very powerful features and save you a lot of time. So creating your own NuGet package. You really have 2 main options, and there's a third I'll talk about later, but for creating your own NuGet package. You can use the command line tool, which is NuGet.exe, and you can there's actually a NuGet package that has that in it that you can download called NuGet.commandline. I know, chicken and the egg, right? But you can use NuGet.exe, which is a command line interface, which actually you can, because they do have a command line interface, it makes it really easy to wrap if you want to do anything custom with it. For some reason, they have the NuGet.core API, but it's rather complicated. I wouldn't recommend using it. Hopefully one of these days they'll have a more of a facade API that you could use and use it programmatically instead. But in the meantime, NuGet.exe is your command line way to do it. And there's actually an open source project called the NuGet Package Explorer, which is a GUI tool for building NuGet packages, and that's actually what I'll demo tonight. But really the core of the package, I mean, other than the payload, of course, the libraries or documentation files or whatever that you're trying to transmit to the user, a big part of it is the NuSpec file, the specification file for the package. You can think of it as the manifest for a NuGet package. It contains metadata about the package, like the ID, authors, version, and those sorts of things. It also contains a listing of the dependencies. Like we talked about before, you can mark in your package that your package depends on other packages, so that NuGet can crawl that graph and pull it all down together for a nice seamless integration, and several other things. But really, in the end, the correct term is to pack a NuGet package. All it really does is zips the manifest and your payload files up together into a zip file, and called a new package file. And a new package file is actually an Open Packaging Conventions format file, an OPC format. And I'm sure someone could give a whole series of talks on the OPC format, but I'm not going to. I actually have a link in the resources later if you want to know more about that. But really, you can think of a NuGet package as a zip file full of binaries and whatever else goes with the library, with a manifest file in it called the NuSpec file. So I'm going to demo that real quick, creating a NuGet package. So let's suppose we have this little lib.internal library. It's an internal library that we've built. Suppose we're working on some new project that the rest of the company hasn't worked on, so nobody else has a library or helpers for doing what we're doing. I mean, imagine it's a single-page applications app. So, another shout out to Colin. But suppose it's something new, and we're breaking some ground here, and so we create a library to help us out. And this is a very simple library. It just has one project lib.data, but you could imagine several different projects and different DLLs and sorts of things, all kinds of helpers in there. And so our team has finished this big project using this new technology, and now another team in the company, or two other teams in the company, or whatever, they're going to start using that technology too. And we have a meeting and we say, hey, let's share our helpers with you. I mean, it took us hundreds of hours to figure out this stuff and to get these in a good quality, get them into a good library that makes sense, and has plenty of unit tests around it and all those sorts of things. And let's just share that with you. Well, you could just ship them the binaries. You could do that. But what happens when you change it later? How, are you going to send them an email every time you change it? And so you can kind of see where I'm going with this. We could make a NuGet package out of this instead. And so let's do that real quick. I'm kind of picky about when I ship libraries. I like to do release build. I know it's not a big deal. I just don't like to ship them debug. But we'll go ahead and build our library real quick. Get the binaries out there. Then I'm going to fire up the NuGet Package Explorer that we talked about just a few minutes ago. And in the NuGet Package Explorer, I'm going to start creating our library. So I'm going to add a lib folder, which is the home for the binaries in your NuGet package. Then I'm going to add a new .NET folder, which is 4.0, which is the version of the framework we're targeting. And you can actually put your binaries directly at the lib folder, but that's very frowned upon. The convention and the best practice when creating NuGet packages is to create a net 4.0 or whatever version of the framework you're targeting folder. That way it communicates to the client, hey, this library is built and it targets net 4.0 or net 3.5. And you could actually have the library target multiple frameworks if you wanted to. If you wanted to take the same code, build it under 4.0, build it under 3.5, build it under 2.0, or even if, I hope you wouldn't have this situation, but you had two different sets of code that targeted the two frameworks that were for the same library, this would support that. And so really it's best practice to under your library folder when you create your binaries to create the appropriate .NET Framework version folder to denote what you're targeting. And now we're going to add our, if I can add our binary for our library. So I'm going to navigate out to my lib.internal, into my main branch, my bin folder, and add my lib.data.dll, the one library that we're trying to share. And so that's about all that we have to do. I mean, if you had a more complicated library, I mean, you could have content files that would be copied into the project. You could have all sorts of different things. You could have tools that are included that are kind of helpers that people can use. You could actually have PowerShell scripts that execute on install to help automate some different installation tasks. And as we talked about before, you could have config transforms that could execute on install. But we have a very simple library here. We just have one DLL, so we're just going to keep it simple. And so we've already kind of we've already defined our payload, which is just our lib.data.dll. And now we're going to work on our metadata. Now the tool doesn't make this very obvious, but what you're doing on the left side here is defining your new spec file. So this is the metadata for our library, and we're going to call it lib.internal. And I did want to note that the ID is something that's actually very important. It's used as your unique identifier for being able to identify if a library has updates. So be kind of careful when you pick your IDs. You can change it later. I mean, there's nothing saying you can't, but then you have to communicate to your users, hey, the library evolved in a different direction. The current name doesn't make sense. We had to rename it or whatnot. So it's kind of a touchy subject. Kind of be careful with your IDs. Try to pick something that'll stick. We've run into that a few times, haven't we, John? Now, version is also something that you have to be a little bit careful about. especially in our hypothetical example, we have a library that worked well in our project. We're going to share it with the rest of the company or whatever enterprise environment we're in. It would be too soon to actually call this a 1.0 because in the versioning in NuGet, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes, a version that starts with 1.0 or 2.0 or anything other than 0 implies that the public API has been defined. And so if you ever have to make any changes to the interfaces or the API, that creates what they call a breaking change in the versioning schema, and would necessitate that you increment the first number. So instead of your library going from 1.1 to 1.2 to 1.3, you'd go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. And it doesn't cause any functional problems, but it might make your users a little nervous to upgrade to your library because it makes it look like you're making big compatibility breaking changes all the time. But I'll talk more about that in a minute. So we're actually going to start the version number of our library with 0.10. Call it 0.10. And that tells our users, hey, this is a 0. Version. We've not really defined our public API yet, so please expect it to change until we release a 1.0. So that gives you time to get it out in the field. Maybe users find issues, maybe users find functional deficiencies, and you have to change the API a little bit in order to compensate. That kind of gives you that breathing room. So we'll call our version 0.10. There's only really 4 fields that are required: ID, version, authors, and description. For authors, we'll just leave it SVNUG. Owners and authors in an enterprise environment is something that you could say, well, we'll set the owner to the manager for the team, and the authors can be a list of all the developers. It's not really important. It's just whatever you want to communicate to people using your library. The icon URL provides you the ability to specify a custom icon for your package. By default, as you could see in the package manager, let me pop over there real quick. By default, in the NuGet UI, if you don't specify a custom icon, you get this icon, which is the NuGet icon. It's not really a big deal, but if for some reason you wanted a custom icon, that metadata attribute lets you specify that. Project URL, that's useful for specifying, hey, this is our main site, or this is our support page, or an enterprise environment. Hey, this is the SharePoint site for the team. And it might have your contact information on there, or ability to submit a bug request, or something. That's a handy way in an enterprise environment, or if you're putting a public package out there to be able to make it easier for people to find more information about you. License URL is a URL to the license that you've specified, and you can check this little box and get that annoying little pop-up that we got when we installed it in the framework. Summary description and release notes, pretty straightforward. Only descriptions required, so we'll call it our internal library for data and whatnot. Release notes are a great way that you could include almost like a change log with your library. Suppose when you go from 0.10 to 0.20, you could say, hey, we added these few features. We had to change this one interface because it didn't really make any sense, or we had to replace this API with this other API because somebody found a better way to do it. That's a good way to communicate that to your users. Copyright, you can specify copyright. You can specify the target language, and you can also specify search tags. So in an enterprise environment, probably not as important, but for a public package, if you're creating a WPF control library, well, you might put WPF and control and XAML or something in there and make it kind of easy for people to find your library. As we talked about before, you can specify the dependencies for your library. You can say, hey, well, my library depends on another internal library, or it depends on Entity Framework, or it depends on whatever. And another neat feature is you can specify framework assemblies that are to be added as references when your library is brought in. So, if you're building, for example, a WPF control library, you might want to say, hey, when you bring my library in, also make sure you bring in presentation core and presentation framework and system component model and whatever else you would need. So that's just really handy. But our library is pretty simple, so we're just going to go with the 4 required attributes: ID, version, authors, and a little description. And actually, what's really great about the Package Explorer, you just go to File, Save, and it's going to create actually our actual new package file. It's going to package it all up for us with the manifest and everything. I'm going to drop that out on the desktop. Now we have our NuGet package, the library in it. Isn't that great? We don't have where to put it yet, though. I'm getting there. Just a little bit more about versioning in NuGet. NuGet uses, for the most part, they're not 100% compliant, but what's called semantic versioning. And semantic versioning, it's somewhat obvious from the name that semantic versioning is all focused on that the version number actually means something. There's semantics in the actual version number. And it uses a three-part version, an x.y.z, where x is the major version and denotes compatibility. So if you have a 1.5 version of a library and you see that a 2.0 came out, well, there could be compatibility breaking changes in there. You might want to not include that pull that in and start using it on the last day before a big release. You might want to test it a little bit first. The Y, the second digit, denotes what's called the minor version or a feature pack. Changing the second digit indicates, hey, there's some new features in this version. We don't think we broke compatibility. We don't think we did. But it denotes that there's some new features available. You might want to read the release docs, figure out what we added. So when you're going from 1.3 whatever to 1.4, that indicates, hey, we've added some new features. And Z is meant to be the patch version or the revision, which indicates that there aren't really any feature changes. It indicates that it's mostly bug fixes. Maybe you slipped in a little teeny feature, but it's mostly should be 100% compatible. You didn't really add anything. It's just a new revision. And actually, semantic versioning supports what's called pre-releases. And that, in the little example here, we have an x.y.z, an alpha 1. You could have an alpha 2 and an alpha 17 and an alpha 300 million if you wanted. I think it goes that high. But you could have a beta 1, beta 2, and then a release candidate 1 and 2. And when the actual RTM comes out, or whatever you consider the final version, the thing you're actually going to call x.y.z, if it's 1.3.0 or whatever, it treats all the pre-release versions, which have that hyphen, whatever tag on it. It indicates that, those pre-release versions are considered less than the final version. And so when actually somebody would go into a NuGet feed to take an update, it would say, hey, we have an update from your pre-release version. Suppose you download the release candidate to the final. You want to take the final? No. Yeah. But, and there's a lot more in semantic versioning, and you can find out more at semver.org. I have the link up here. But really the point is to just really stress that the version number means something. And it's a great way, if you actually do follow the semantic versioning specification, to actually be able to communicate things to your users with your version number. So we've talked about kind of what is NuGet and how you can use it to manage your libraries. We talked about creating your own packages. But as I hinted to a few minutes ago, what's really use of a package that you can't get to? So let's set up our own NuGet feed, won't we? So I'm going to pop back over to Visual Studio, and I have a little web app here, and I'm actually going to install what's called NuGet.server. And NuGet.server is an open source project, and it's really just built to add a NuGet feed to an existing web application. Well, we have a really simple one here that actually really doesn't have anything in it. And this one's really built just for what we're about to do, which is have a NuGet server. But to do that, we go to manage our NuGet packages for our solution. And we go to the official feed, which we only have one feed. We could just click all to do it if we wanted to. And search for NuGet.server. We can say install in our one project. And actually, NuGet.server is an example of a library that actually has several dependencies, as you'll see over here. Uh-oh. Oh, I'll have to go make that file not read-only real quick. Sorry about that. If I was connected to SQL Server, it would do that for me. Or TFS, what am I saying? There, make those not read-only. Let's try that again. It's nice that it gives you a nice little error if something happens. All right, let's go find it again. Instead of some cryptic, object reference not set to an instance of an object. That's a lovely one. We run into that time to time, don't we, John? That's a good area. I love that one. Let's see if it'll behave better this time. I'm thinking it might kick out when it, nope. I was thinking it might kick out when it tried to add the references to the solution, but no, it was fine. It added all the references as we expected. The NuGet server itself, and then all of its smattering of libraries that it needs. And as you'll notice, it added several files to our solution. A default ASPX, which is just a little helper page with that points us to the different package sources for it. As we saw before, packages config. It did make some changes to our web config. It made a lot of changes. But the two that I'm really going to point out is the API key. If you actually post packages to the main NuGet feed on NuGet.org, you're assigned what's called an API key, and it's almost like a shared secret password. And what that does is allows you to be able to post packages to the server. Of course, on the main NuGet feed, there's an API key per user, you know what I mean, or per group or whatever they do it by. For NuGet.server, there's only one API key, at least by default. So you have the ability to set your shared secret password, API key, and to specify a path to the packages. Now, by default, it'll use this actual packages folder that it created. It'll use that as the folder to store the packages that are uploaded. You can, but being able to specify the path through the packages means you could have it out on a SAN somewhere if you wanted to, or if you have a network attached storage device that you wanted all this stuff stored to, you could, or just a UNC path out on the network somewhere that you wanted these packages stored to, you could do that. They don't have to be stored on the web server. So this is just a couple of settings to note. And actually, if we fire this thing up real quick, yeah, go ahead, override it. It's all good. We'll open that default page, and that default, that ASPX that it created, is just kind of a helper page to give you a couple of links for you. One is, this first one is actually the feed URL, and so you could actually, with this URL, if this feed's running, which it is, you can actually add that as another NuGet feed in your packages config inside Visual Studio, and I'll show you that in a minute. And the second is an example of how you would use through NuGet.exe and push a package to this repository. So it just gives you kind of a couple examples. And I'm actually going to snag this one. Well, actually, wait a minute. I have to copy one thing real quick. So I'm going to take that NuGet package we built earlier, that lib.internal. I'm going to take it, I'm going to copy it into our little NuGet server right here in our packages folder. And then I'm going to take that URL, and I'm going to go over to our little demo app that we were working on earlier that we added Entity Framework to. And I'm going to go into the settings, and I'm going to add our new little NuGet feed. I mean, now in an enterprise environment, you'd have this deployed out on an IS web server somewhere. But for the purposes of the demo, it just runs right here. It was called our internal NuGet feed. And added it successfully. And so now when we click on our internal NuGet feed, there's a library. We can install it. It's installed. Lib.data. It's that easy. I mean, if it wasn't for me up here blabbing about it, I mean, that would take, what, 45 seconds? I mean, it really is that easy. But just a little bit more about setting up your NuGet feed. You have a couple of different options. I showed you NuGet.server already and how easy it is to set up that as a NuGet feed internally. There's also, you can actually do just a shared file folder if you wanted to. That's supported. Of course, that's a little harder to control, but you can do that. You can also use the NuGet Gallery project, which is also an open source project. And it gives you kind of the look and feel of NuGet.org. Now, I've not played with it that much myself, so I don't know how much of that look and feel you get, but we could go to NuGet.org real quick. So this is the look and feel of NuGet.org, which is what NuGet Gallery is supposed to provide for you, which is kind of confusing because they call the main site the NuGet Gallery. But it provides, I know certain things that it provides, the NuGet Gallery project that NuGet Server doesn't, for example, is keeping track of the download counts and those sorts of things. There's some statistics that I know that it gathers in addition to the look and feel. So that's something you could play with if you wanted a little bit nicer of a solution. For the project that we work on, though, NuGet Server has always worked just fine. It's a little simpler, so that's why we use it. But NuGet.gallery is, or the NuGet Gallery is out there if you want a little more advanced, a little nicer looking feed. You also can use a cloud-based solution called MyGit, which is a cloud-based NuGet feed hosting solution. Now they advertise it as NuGet as a service. I like that. There's everything as a service. I mean, there's going to be nachos as a service one of these days. But no, it doesn't really look like a really a good solution if you don't want to have the infrastructure locally. Which, you know, if you're in a startup environment or a distributed environment, I mean, you don't really have hardware anyway. It makes good sense. It's also, if it's something that you're not really committed to, it's something you want to try out on a couple teams, and, you know, in your enterprise you're not willing to commit the hardware or the infrastructure hours to it. I mean, it's a great solution for that. I can show you their main page real quick. Like I said, not used it, but there's been several articles that have talked about MyGit as an option for a cloud-based NuGet feed solution. Actually, I had this idea a while back, and they beat me to it. So, but that's always an option too. But let's pop down to. There's a couple other NuGet publishing tools I wanted to mention. Gitter, also an open source project. I think you kind of notice a theme here. Open source projects. It's very nice. Now, Gitter is a TFS 2010 build add-on for NuGet that allows you to integrate NuGet with your build processes, and so that makes it so that you can do continuous integration with NuGet. You can do nightly deploy builds with NuGet. You could do, you know, your final builds with NuGet with using Gitter. So it's a very very well thought of option for including NuGet in your builds. NuGet Feed is another tool you can use. It's also an open source project. It allows you to easily build an RSS feed of NuGet package updates. I know developers, not all developers are super RSS heavy, but I think we all have a reader somewhere of different things we follow. So in an enterprise environment, you could set up the NuGet Feed open source project and be able to easily communicate when corporate libraries are updated. You know, say, hey, we went to version 2.0 of lib.internal and it's got these new things in it. You know, if you're going to start a new project, maybe you want to grab it. Those sorts of things. But like I said, I got the links here. I'll post the slides later if you want more information on that. So now, just a little bit about NuGet in the enterprise. We've talked about you know, what is NuGet and why you would use it for managing libraries. We've talked about creating your own NuGet packages. We've talked about creating our own NuGet feeds, and we've kind of talked about all of this in a very enterprisey sense, you know, the different examples and everything. But I mean, really, there's lots of different ways you can manage your library resources in enterprise. So why use NuGet, or really why use anything? NuGet allows for easy code sharing. And actually, this is kind of a consistent theme for why you would use it in the enterprise. It allows you to easily share code. You know, if on a certain project, like we talked about, you know, suppose we have a ASP.NET single-page app, and we were the first team to use that technology, and we built a library with all kinds of goodies for doing that. We can share that library with the other teams that are going to do that, so they don't go through that same pain. They don't go and rewrite all that code. They don't go and rediscover all these things. It allows us to just share the fruits of our labor with them, and you know, it makes their job easier, and it might also make our jobs easier. There's a lot that you can learn by sharing, you know, with somebody else. Collaboration's a big thing for a reason. They may find things that you did in your library that don't make any sense. You know, they'll find features you missed. They'll find bugs you missed. So it helps them, and it helps you sharing that code. And so that kind of bleeds into the next topic. It improves team collaboration, and there's kind of two two scenarios there. We kind of already talked about the inter-team. You know, we came up with a library. Now you can use it. It even helps intra-team, which is actually what we use it on the project that John and I work on. Intra-team, it makes it easy. You know, if you have a solution, a large system that maybe has 4 or 5 different applications, there's a website in there, web services to do certain things. It makes it easy to share common libraries, you know, within a team. You know, certain data access libraries, for example, or if you have a domain model that you want to share between a couple of services. Makes it very easy to do that. Another great advantage of NuGet Enterprise is it improves code reuse. You know, because we can share code and because we can collaborate, you know, instead of the first, you know, ASP.NET SPA team, instead of them writing it and then the next team writes it and the next team writes it and the fourth team writes it, and you know, you have 5 copies of what's really the same code. You know, if one team discovers it, does a good job of building a decent library, shares it with the rest of the company, they can reuse that code. That library doesn't get written 5 times, it gets written once, you know. And even if you spent half the time on that one library than you did writing all 5, it would be of so much better quality, you know, it would make so much more sense. And because you only wrote it once, you know, you're not spending all that time. You know, you're not spending all that time over and over and over again, reinventing the wheel, rewriting that same code. So it's very useful. I mean, it saves time, saves money, saves frustration. Oh.
Alan, are there any issues where one team member has NuGet and another doesn't? Does NuGet have any problems with the team member who wouldn't have NuGet?
No, not in my experience. They wouldn't be able to pull in new packages if you didn't have NuGet. NuGet's actually free. It's just a Visual Studio extension, so it doesn't usually cause an issue if somebody doesn't have it. The only thing that they wouldn't be able to update it in the libraries. So because as you noticed, and actually I'll pop over there real quick, as you'll notice with the way that packages folder works, and actually you can use NuGet in a mode where it doesn't actually download the packages locally, but by default it'll go ahead and download them locally into this packages folder. And what's really great about that is if you don't have NuGet, it doesn't matter. The binaries are right there. You check them into TFS, they're right there. So, I mean, was a great design choice on their part.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll go back to the slide. Oh, another question.
For within a team, like that scenario. So, so it would be where you have created a project that you want to use on completely separate, like products, or so you create a common library that you want to reuse in completely separate products, basically. Then
you can. In the team that John and I work on, we actually have one system, and it's a very large system, and it has many different pieces. And there's certain libraries that we share between those different pieces, like some of our data access and repository libraries, some of the document creation libraries. We do some document generation. We share that, and you know, different helpers and those sorts of things. So they don't necessarily have to be different products. They could be. They could be different products built by the same team, but they also could be just one large project that just happens to have several different pieces.
So then, rather than just including the project within each of those solutions, by packaging it up like that, you then save on compile time and build time and that.
Yeah, that's actually one thing I didn't even note in the talk. Migrating your solutions away from just including like 67 different projects to be able to build, it cut build times down. I mean, it was over an order of magnitude. What do you think, John? Oh, yeah. I mean, it was... because we had so many libraries that, you know, the very most complex tool that we have actually had, you know, before we separated it all out, had, I don't know, like 40 or 50 different projects in it, and now it only has 14. That's still a lot, but, I mean, compare 14 to 40 or 50, and especially the library projects have a lot more code in them. You know, they have a lot more stuff, and so it actually reduced our compile times greatly, switching to NuGet.
As well as the time it takes to just open the solution.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that...
Yeah, as John said, it also made a huge difference on how long it took to open the solution. You know, because if it's got to go out and crawl 40 some odd projects, you know, on a 7,200 RPM hard disk, it takes a little while. You know, I mean, not like 20 minutes, but I mean, the open time on the solutions, the bigger ones used to take, especially on our old XP machines, sometimes like over a minute. I mean, it was quite a while. So no, you're right. There's big compile and there's just big productivity advantages you can get from splitting things out like that.
Sorry, I just thought of another question. So, is there any restrictions on what you can package up? Do you have to be the owner of it, or, for example, if I have a lot of like Microsoft libraries that I want to just package up so I can easily pull in, you know, a subset without having to like have the SDK installed on a build machine or something along those lines. Are there any legal issues there?
I've not seen anything. Of course, I'm not a lawyer, but I've not seen anything with that. And especially if you only published it to an internal feed, I don't really see what the problem would be, because it's pretty much the same thing as if you actually physically took the binaries and copied them around all over the place anyway. It's virtually the same thing. But again, not a lawyer. Can't say it's legal advice. But we actually did that for a few different third-party libraries that we use, and it worked out very, very well to be able to. And that way, anytime you needed to change, like if you wanted to take the whole system to a new version, it made it very, very easy. More questions?
Is there anything you can do with debug and release builds? Say, if you're having a problem with a library, you want the debug build. Is there anything in NuGet that handles that?
Yeah, in NuGet, you do have the ability to, when you publish to the public feed, you can have it also when it generates your package, what's considered a symbols package, I think they call it, that has the symbols for the project in it, the debug symbols, and that goes out to symbolsource.org or .com, I think. The last I looked, and this was a couple months ago, so maybe they've made some strides since then. The last I looked, it was very difficult to set up an internal symbol source server, not an internal symbol server, but an internal NuGet symbol source server. It looked like they had one project, an open source project out there to do that. It didn't look like it was very easy to use, but like I said, a couple months ago they may have made strides since then, or maybe I just didn't read the documentation right. But no, that's a good point. We've run into that a few times on our projects where, you know, especially because we do use the pre-release builds for when we're working on a new version of a library. You might find a bug in there, you might want to debug into it. The way we've actually worked around it is, or actually one way I found that I think you can work around it is you can make sure that the source paths, like if you're using the same TFS structure, which you probably are if you're all on the same team, make sure everybody checks it out to the same folder. So the folder paths are all the same, because that gets stored in the metadata. We didn't actually implement that on our team because it wasn't big enough of a problem. But I did notice that if I would publish a library from my machine, which had a certain path structure, I could debug into it. Just like if John published one from his machine because the path was correct, he could debug into it. So that might be one way you could work around that, because you all have the source anyway, or you should. So that's an idea.
Another thing you could do too, my question isn't related, but I mean, you can always publish the PDB file with in the library folder. So
yeah, that's what we were doing with it. It seemed like sometimes though you still couldn't debug into it.
Oh,
I don't
okay.
know if it's because it had the hint path in it and couldn't find it. I don't know. But we did start shipping the PDBs with it. I mean, John, have you noticed it being any better since we started shipping the PDBs?
I generally haven't had a problem debugging.
Okay. Well, yeah, then maybe you're right. Maybe the PDBs fixed it for you.
A lot, even on the public gallery. I mean, a lot of developers that post stuff to the public gallery. I have 4 projects on the public gallery myself, and I always ship the PDBs. So
I gotta go look.
No, you don't have to look. But
I'll look later.
Okay, but one of the things I was going to ask a question about package restore, but I think you briefly mentioned it. But you had a bullet point about automatic management of dependencies. And are you familiar with the strong naming problems that exist with the management of dependencies in NuGet?
No, I don't think I do.
Okay. So, you're not?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I just would, I guess, briefly mention them. Obviously, if here's an example. We were talking about ResSharp, I think, over Twitter or email a couple of weeks ago, right?
Yeah, ResSharp.
Right. And ResSharp used to have a dependency on JSONNet, right? Which is the serializer that it used to use internally. It doesn't anymore, and the reason it doesn't, and in fact, this is something that bites me all the time too, because I have one of my public libraries has a dependency on JSON.NET. And JSON.NET is now strong named. And the reason it is, you know the reason it is because it's a core part of ASP.NET 4.5. and right. And so it's the default serializer in ASP.NET or the next version of ASP.NET. And of course, all the ASP.NET binaries are strong named. So therefore, JSON.NET has to be strong named. But JSON.NET is like the 4th or 5th or 6th most popular package on the entire gallery. And so, I mean, there are literally thousands of projects that depend on it. And whenever they change their strong name key, it breaks all those dependencies. And that's something, in fact, I have a podcast and we interviewed Phil Hack 2 episodes ago. And Phil Hack is I don't know if you guys are familiar with him, but he is was the lead, the project manager of NuGet when it was started, and now he's with GitHub, but he still works on the NuGet team. And this is something that we asked him, and then this is something that they're working on. But that's really one of the main drawbacks in terms of, I mean, obviously the best solution would be if it's in NuGet, you should never strong name it. But of course, that's not possible.
Right.
I mean, all the ASP.NET nightly builds now are on NuGet, so, and they're all strong named. And then anything that's third party that those builds depend on have to be strong named. So that's tricky.
Yep.
That's something you want to be aware of. I mean, if you write a library that has a dependency, long story short, if you write a library that has a dependency, and he talked about, you know, you can specify dependencies on another NuGet library that's strong named, you're going to have some maintenance issues that you have to be aware of. I mean, every once in a while, like one of my projects is called indextank.net. It's an API library for search engine. And seems like every 2 or 3 weeks I get an email, you know, hey, I just downloaded your package. It's great, but it's broken. You know what I mean? So I have to, you know, go and, you know, because I don't use it all the time myself. So, but anyway. And one more thing, too. Since you know, this talk is about NuGet in the enterprise, and of course I'm not an enterprise guy, I'm a freelance guy. And it's great. I mean, as far as setting up your own server, I have one too for our internal libraries that I use. But I think it's really important, and this is something that developers should consider, and this is something I think enterprise developers especially don't think about enough, is that if you have something that you think is useful or would be useful outside your own organization, you should definitely consider uploading it to the public gallery, for sure. And share it with the world, you know. Yeah.
I'm sure it would depend on the company. You know,
Right.
some places are a little more restrictive about, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
But like a startup, for example, they, you know, it
Right.
still could be, you know, that'd be a different issue.
Right.
So, thank you, Lee. I really appreciate the point about the strong naming.
On the debugging with the PDB files, I was going to point out is Visual Studio by default has the Just My Code feature turned on, and so it won't allow you to debug into external libraries unless you've turned that off.
Okay.
So that might have been your problem. You may have had
Maybe
the my
that
code
was-
turned on.
Maybe that was the difference. Because like I said, in our environment, it was an issue for like 2 days one time because, you know, three of us were working on kind of collaborating on something together, and, you know, most of the time it's not an issue. So we, you know, lowest hanging fruit, right? It didn't add that much value, so we kind of glossed over it. But no, that's a good point. Thank you, Colin. More questions? Okay. Well, hang on a second. Okay, I got the resources here. I got the resources here that I promised. You know, as Lee mentioned, I got Phil Hack's blog on here. He doesn't talk as much about NuGet these days, but he still does some.
Project manager anymore. He's just a
Developer.
guy on the team now. Yeah.
Dude on the team.
Right.
But yeah, I also have Scott Hanselman's blog on here. He talks quite a bit about NuGet, and I'm sure there's other blogs you could put on here. And like I said, I'll get these slides posted on my blog, and we'll have them out on the SVNUG site here shortly. So if you're wanting to learn more about NuGet, I think it's a good place to start. So, thank you.